Hey everyone, it's Nighthauer here, and today I've got a guide for veteran Maw of Lorkhaj. Now the purpose of this guide is to help get you your first clear if you're new to trials, or if you're a raid lead, to give you all the information and knowledge you need to know about what happens in this trial, what to expect, so that you can then pass it on to your raid group. Now as always, there's going to be timestamps below, so feel free to skip around to the part that you're most interested in. As far as structure for this video, I will start out here with a little bit of tips and tricks, some kind of basic information about optimization and stuff like that for this trial, and your requirements that you want to have for your group before you go in here. And then after that, we're just going to walk through the trial step by step, going through it the entire trial. So starting with some tips and tricks. So for healers, radiating regeneration can be a great heal and really good for this trial. It really helps you on the twins and also on the first boss when the group is very spread out. To have that, you kind of use it as a spammable to try and get it on everybody in the group, and that helps keep them alive, even when they're running from point A to point B or a little bit spread out. The other thing that I would recommend for healers is on the first and the last boss, using Gossamer. Gossamer is a dungeon set that drops from Cradle of Shadows, and it just reduces the damage you take from AoE abilities, which can be useful here, and again, like I mentioned, on the last boss. While this is certainly not required, it can help the group and make things a little bit easier for you. For tanks, I would definitely recommend that you have Flare unlocked if you're new, and a good idea of what other damage mitigation abilities that you have, either for your class or just in general. And I would just note on both these topics, I have guides for healers and tanks, and also for group optimization and sets and stuff like that on the channel. Just go to my channel and then look at the playlist, and you should be able to find it pretty well. I try to keep things pretty organized there, but it's very important that you have a good idea of what to do, what to have on your bar as a healer or a tank, and of course as a DPS. You really want to know what your class does, what your abilities do, before you step into a veteran trial like this, because it is going to be a little bit challenging. Now, for requirements, what I would recommend for your group is to have 60k DPS on everybody in the group. I would note that when this trial first came out, 30k, I think, or somewhere around there, was like high DPS. Okay, so if you were doing 30k, you were doing great. So 60k is obviously way more than you absolutely need. However, what I suggest, and the reason I'm suggesting this and what most groups do, is they use DPS for a stand-in as your overall knowledge of the game and of your character. Because you don't want someone coming in here who doesn't have a good grasp on their character, what all their abilities do. You want to make sure they have all their passives, they've leveled up Undaunted, all kinds of stuff like that, right? So having a 60k DPS is just kind of a way of doing that. For healers and tanks, it's a little bit different. I would certainly make sure that they have cleared tanks that they can survive through Hellraw and the Warrior without dying, no problem, and that healers, that they have at least decent combat prayer up times and things like that. This trial is pretty interesting because while now it is still fairly easy to do as far as like for more experienced groups, because the DPS has gone up so much and that makes everything just kind of easier, it's still very challenging in that you have to have everybody in the group working together and doing the right thing to get through it. A lot of the other trials up to this point, you can have several people in the group who don't know what they're doing and they can kind of be carried and they do okay. This trial here, certainly for the twins, I'm sure most of you know twins prog is a real thing. You really need everybody doing the right thing and everybody knowing what's going on, because one person can wipe the entire group without too much trouble, okay, if they don't know what's going on. So it's very important you have group coordination. And also, again, with the note with the 60k DPS, one of the things you're going to have to be doing all these mechanics, and that takes a lot of mental effort, and so group DPS is going to go down because everybody's doing mechanics, paying more attention to that than their DPS, and you want them to have enough muscle memory that they can still do decent DPS while also doing those mechanics and while learning those mechanics. So anyways, that's it for the preamble. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the first couple of pools here. So when you first walk in, the first thing that's going to happen is a bunch of really small ads are going to spawn and they're going to run out. Those can all just be chained in, AoE them down, not a big deal, don't worry about them. The next thing that will happen is that you're going to get from left to right, you're going to get a Sun Eater, a Sword and Board Shadow Guard, and then the Archer, the Dreadstalker on the right. So what you're going to do is have your off tank taunt the Archer, and then he's going to run to the left of the Sun Eater. And what that's going to do is going to pull that Archer in until he's stacked on top of the Sun Eater. So you're just range stacking the Archer. Now, while that's happening, the main tank is going to taunt the Sword and Board and then run up to the Sun Eater and stand a little bit, like a meter or two behind the Sun Eater. That's where you're going to hold the Sword and Board guy. And you want to go ahead and debuff, go ahead and taunt the Sun Eater while you're running by. While all that's happening, all the DPS are going to run up directly to the Sun Eater. The Sun Eaters are DPS priority throughout the entire trial. Now, what you don't want to do is run up and stand directly on top of the Sun Eater, because this is what will happen. And so that's it dropping its negate bubble. So what the Sun Eater does is it picks someone at random in the group, and then it drops a negate bubble right on top of them. So ideally, you don't want it dropping on top of the Sun Eater, because then all of your ground dots your Magicka ground dots, like your Wall of Elements and stuff like that, it'll eat them. They'll all go away, and they won't do any damage to it. And so it becomes much harder to kill the Sun Eater and takes much longer. So ideally, what you want to do, if you're a melee DPS, and this is always true, you'll always want to DPS for maximum melee range. And then if you see it turn around and look at you, or if you get a raid notification saying that, hey, it's targeting you, you want to go ahead and move even further back so that it gets dropped far away from the actual Sun Eater. If you are a ranged DPS, you want to stand much further than that. So stand at like 8 meters, 9 meters, that's totally fine. And that way, if the negate bubble gets dropped, it's nowhere close to the Sun Eater, and it's not going to reduce everybody's DPS so much, and you can keep DPSing it down pretty quickly. And what you kind of want to do is like a loose stack around, kind of like in a semicircle around the Sun Eater, and then you can have, whoever your left side healer is and your right side healer is, which I'll explain later, can kind of heal that side of the group, and it's not a big deal. Again, if it gets dropped, the negate bubble gets dropped on you, the first thing you want to do is dodge roll out of it very quickly, and then just go back to whatever you were doing. I will note that someone, it won't happen on this particular ad pool likely, but if the archer is up for too long, the Dreadstalker, it will keep summoning panthers, and they attack people at random, whoever has the Pillar of Light on them. And so if you get more than, 1 or 2 on you, you probably want to be dodge rolling and kind of kiting those cats. The idea is that you just don't want to die by getting one-shotted by like 3 different cats, because then it's just going to change and they're going to pick a different target and then go one-shot that person. So, and so on and so forth. So ideally, if if the archer is up too long, or if you have several of them and you get targeted, you just want to kind of kite and just move around so that at least it's not killing, it doesn't kill you and then go kill other people, right? At least you're only 1 DPS down in that situation. Or potentially 1 healer, unfortunately. They can be CC'd and they can be chained in too, so that's another thing that you or someone else can help with to at least kind of give you a break from having to kite and run around with those cats. Now you notice here that I've stood kind of opposite the DPS and the opposite side of the Sun Eater from the DPS. That's very important because, again, that AoE attack, you'll see it on the next pull. Actually, let's just go ahead and go to the next pull. All right, so this one, as soon as you start to walk up the stairs, as soon as you've entered the door, they're going to start spawning in. And over to your right, there's going to be a few small ads, kind of like in the first room. Kill them real quickly. And then you're going to get a Sun Eater over to the right under the archway. And all the DPS and healers can run over there, drop your ground dots, make sure you're kind of loosely stacked, spread out a little bit, not too close to it, and then just DPS it down. Now, there's a lot of ways of doing all these pulls. I'm going to tell you my way because I think it's kind of simpler. If you mess up, it's not that big of a deal. It's pretty forgiving. And so that's why I'm explaining it this way. It's not necessarily the fastest strats, not necessarily most efficient. It's just what I think is the easiest, and while still being fairly efficient. So what I like to do is have the off tank always grab all of the ranged units. So they're going to grab the 2 archers. They spawn up on the next ledge. So you're going to have to run up the stairs a little bit, and then have the main tank again grab the sword and board guy. And then what you're going to do is have the off tank stand right here. And what that does is it pulls the archers into one location because they move until they can see you. And then once they can see you, they just stand there. And then again, have the main tank just hold the sword and board guy a little bit away from them, opposite the DPS. And the reason for that is you don't want the DPS to get hit by the AoE if you can all help it. You'll see here that happens because I stacked them right on top. In this ad pool, it's not a big deal. You can see that they take damage, but everybody gets healed right back up. But if there's a lot of other damage going out and other things going on, it can kill DPS. And that'll be most explained in our third ad pull here. All right, so I think originally the idea is that the two-hander would sunder the armor, and that you didn't want the person having their armor sundered also holding the sword and board guy, because he hits hard, and also both those abilities are in an AoE, and so it can kill a lot of DPS if you have them turn towards the group, or if you have them in the group, etc. So you don't want that. However, damage mitigation has gone up so high that the tanks can kind of survive by just holding block, and it's not really a problem. If you do find that you are dying holding both the sword and board and the two-hander, then what I would recommend to you is slotting some sort of extra damage mitigation ability. So you could do Flare is a great one. You don't have to do anything. Defensive Stance will reduce your damage while blocking, so that's great. And, there are other class ones as well that you could also slot. And I honestly don't think you don't strictly need those, but they can be helpful. And if you're on a tanking class that has a little bit less damage mitigation than like a Necromancer or something, something, or even a DK, so like a Warden or something like that, you might want to definitely slot one of those abilities because you just don't have, those classes just don't have the same damage mitigation. So what we're going to do on this fight is what you want to do in all situations if you're the main tank and you have the two-hander and the sword and board. So what you're going to do is you're going to taunt both of them, and then you're going to run behind the Sun Eater and get opposite the DPS. And you only want to be like a meter or two, so you're going to kind of push yourself in that corner and then just hold block, okay? Buff and debuff, and everything will be dead in a few seconds, hopefully. So the DPS, you're all going to run up and just DPS down the Sun Eater, and then you're going to cleave down, just by all your dots and everything, the sword and board and the two-hander, the Savage. And so hopefully the Sun Eater dies first, and then you've got to DPS down the other two real quick, but it shouldn't be a big deal. In that situation, everybody's kind of grouped up. Once the Sun Eater's dead, it's not really a big deal. Healer's going to be able to put down their heals, and you should be okay. People shouldn't be dying. Now, the off tank, I would just grab both the Dreadstalkers and then just kind of step up the stairs a little bit. That will cause them to move into line of sight because one of the pillars will be blocking them, and hopefully should be stacked up. If they're not stacked up right on top of each other or pretty close to it, then maybe just move to the left a little bit and just kind of move around the corner. Again, they'll move until they can just barely see you, and that should cause them to stack in the same area. Once that's happened, you can move out from behind the pillar, you can move up to them, and then just try to keep them turned away from the group and keep them taunted and keep them debuffed. Once the DPS has killed the Sun Eater and then taken out the sword and board and the two-hander, they're going to move over to the archers and go ahead and kill them. Again, you might get a few, of the Panthers spawning at this point, so if you get too many on you, just kind of kite them around as best you can. It's not really a big deal. Dodge roll as you need to, and just kill the archers, and they die pretty quick. Again, if you have really low DPS, there are other ways that you would probably want to do this, but again, I think if you have that low a DPS at this point in the game, you probably need to learn more about your character, learn how to do a rotation and stuff like that better, at least until you're up to like 40, 45k, and if you can get to 40 or 45k, you can get to 60k. Again, that's just my recommendation. Now, before going into the next room, you really want to practice your formation. So what I always do when I'm with new groups is I go over to this archway over here, and then I have everybody get in formation. And this is the typical formation that you will see. And this is a good formation to know how to use, know where to be in. So the positions you can see from the DPS's left to right are labeled R1 through R4, M1 through M4, and that just stands for melee and ranged. And you'll use this formation a couple other places. Kynes Aegis is the main one that I can think of off the top of my head, but there might be others as well. Now, the one change that I recommend is moving where the healers are going to be standing, and the reason for that is because of a mechanic that we'll talk about a little bit later, but I actually recommend moving the healers around to this outside point. And the goal with the healer positioning in both situations is that the healer on the left heals the left side of the group, and the healer on the right heals the right side. And they should be in such a position that they can hit combat prayer and hit all four people on their side. Now, by moving them to the outside here, it does allow their combat prayer to reach the main tank and possibly the off tank. So that's helpful, but it's not really needed in this particular trial. The main reason is because of a mechanics reason that I'll explain here in a minute. But you want to get everybody in position. If you're the raid lead, you might need to walk around, say, hey, you're standing here, jump up and down, assign people positions. I'll leave a link to this below so you can link it in your Discord if you need it, although I know there's a lot out there for this. And then just confirm that, what you want is everybody as close together as they can, but you want them spread far enough apart so they don't get hit by AoEs that are going to happen a little bit later, that are going to happen on the first boss fight here. Now, once you have everybody kind of in position where you think is a good, then what you want to do is just have the tank move to a different location. They can drop an altar or a Jubilee cake or something, and then as a stand-in for the boss, and then have everybody go reform up on them. You should be able to do this. Your group should be able to reform up fairly quickly in position and not have too much of a problem. And I would do this 2 or 3 times and do it. And if people are successful, then you're good. If people are struggling, then you might need to re-explain something, explain to them where they need to stand, et cetera, et cetera. But they need to be able to form up pretty quickly from having been in just like a loose group or whatever, because that's what you're going to have to do on this first fight. So if you can't do this, then you probably can't do the first fight, right? So just, you got to work on this until you have it right, and then go into the first boss. Don't try to fix the stacks while you're actually fighting the boss. Typically that doesn't go well. Of course, if you have 1 or 2 people and you can kind of be like, hey, Jack, move to your left, move to your right, whatever, then that's okay. But if it's the whole group, you're just not going to be able to micromanage that many people successfully. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the mechanics on the first boss. I'm just going to run through them fairly quickly here. So the first thing is that every 20% health, so at 80, 60, 40, and 20, you're going to get, I believe it's 4 Panthers that spawn. And the Panthers are just like the ones that the archers spawn. They go and attack someone at random. They cannot be taunted, but they can be crowd controlled. So this is one of the reasons why DK tanks are considered like the gold standard for tanks, because they have the abilities that you really want. They just work perfectly in most situations, almost like the trials were built around having a DK tank. So what you want to do is chain them in using your chain ability, and then use talons, choking talons, to hold them in place. So you chain talons, and that's how you get the Panthers in. If they are close enough to the main boss, they will die and cleave pretty quickly. If you have a few that are in the back and they're munching on a healer, that's a problem. So ideally, you would just chain them in, but a lot of times they get CC'd. So if you're a DPS or you're a healer, you just want to be careful that you're not accidentally CCing these adds so that they can't be chained in. And the tanks, you need to be aware and make sure you chain them in very quickly once they do spawn. If you are having a problem, it'll mostly be for the healers if they're getting munched on in the back by a bunch of Panthers. Then what you want to do is just say, okay, what we're going to do is just target them down. So as soon as the Panthers spawn, everybody turns and DPSs them down. Now, what you don't want to do is move positions. So if you're in a melee position and one of the Panthers is so far back that you can't reach it, you just want to stay parsing on the boss and let everybody who's ranged and who can reach it go ahead and DPS it down. They don't have a ton of health and they will die fairly quickly. It slows down the fight a little bit, but it's not a big deal. The main thing you don't want is people dying because they're getting eaten by the cats. If you're not on a DK, you can use, any ability that will slow, any ability, Silver Leash to chain them in. You can use a Bone Totem on a Necromancer. You could use Razor Caltrops. Any ability, class ability or otherwise, that will slow targets, that will chain them in, and that will hold them in place. That's what you want to use. And again, just hold them near the boss and they'll die quickly. Also, I would note if the cats are on a melee DPS, usually the heals are good enough on the melee DPS because they're right in the center of everything that you don't have to worry about it. And again, you can just wait for them to die and cleave. It's mostly when the cats go to the people kind of on the outside that you have a problem. All right, now the second mechanic is also health gated, so it's based on health percentages, and that is that the boss will create a shield around him. It happens at 70% and at 40%, so you have to deal with it 2 times during the fight. And what happens is you'll see he gets these purple crystals around him, and he holds his weapon in both hands above his head. And during that phase, what happens is that he has a damage shield on him, and while he has that damage shield, everybody in the group, you'll see these exploding AoEs that keep happening. Everybody in the group is taking damage. So this is one of the reasons why you want to be spread out in this formation. It's so that everybody can get heals and stay close together while also not overlapping. And what happens is that this does damage every time it blows up, and that ticks higher every time. So you start taking more and more damage. And so eventually you can't heal through it anymore. So this is a DPS phase. So it's 70 and 40%. You want to make sure that someone's using a horn and that someone's dropping a Colossus. If you're a healer, you want to make sure that you've got all your heal over times on the ground before this phase, and then just spam combat prayer to keep everybody alive. Again, now with our current DPS, this phase should go by pretty quickly as long as nobody's dead on the ground and you're not having other problems. So tanks, it's very important that you grab those cats quickly and that you CC them during that phase. And then if you're an off tank, that you're not actually like walking over the top of anybody while you're trying to chain in those cats, because you'll kill them pretty easily and you'll be fine, but you can kill other people in your group. All right, now the third mechanic you have to worry about are the curses. So what happens is he'll hold his weapon up in the air and you'll see 3 balls float out and they land on 3 people at random in the group. It could be anybody in the group, and it curses them. What happens when you're cursed is over the course of about 8 to 10 seconds, you move slower and slower until you can't move at all. So it's similar to Hoarfrost in Veteran Cloud Rest, except for at the end of it, there's nothing to shed. So you have to go to these cleanse pads along the outside. Those are the glowing circles along the outside. If you have it for too long, you'll eventually not be able to move, and then it'll just one-shot you. You'll just die, and there's nothing anybody can do besides cleansing on the cleanse pads. Now, this is the reason that we had our healers position themselves differently. So the reason they're on the outside, a lot of times people will like, okay, these 2 pads are the 2 healer pads, and these 2 pads are the 2 tank pads, and DPS, you can only use these other 2 pads unless you ask permission. Okay, what that creates is a super complicated situation where a bunch of people don't know what's going on, but they think they need to ask permission, and then they constantly use the wrong pad. They constantly use the healer pad or the tank pad, and it's a huge problem. So by just simply putting the healers on the outside here, you're basically making them so close to the cleanse pads that no one can beat them to it. So if they get cursed, they should be able to beat any DPS to those pads, no problem. DPS, if you see a healer or a tank going for a pad, the same one that you're going for, pick a different pad. It's better for you to even die than to take one of the healer or the tank's pads, okay? So even if, if a healer is slow to react or something, don't go take their pad. Now, the tanks I would reserve pads for, and I would reserve the two closest to the exit door, so the ones kind of almost immediately to the tank's left and right. I mean, it's a little ways away, but directly to their right, directly to their left, and those are the tank pads. So what happens is the curses go out, and they curse 3 people at random, and then this happens this happens twice. So it'll happen, and then a short while later, it'll happen again. And you can see around the outside that there are 6 cleanse pads, and that means 6 people get cursed. So there are enough cleanse pads for everybody to get cleansed. However, when you first get the curse, you will see this AoE pop up at your feet. When that AoE is on your feet, if anybody else is inside of that AoE, so if you're too close to them or they're too close to you, it will curse them as well. And then you're not going to have enough cleanse pads. So if you curse someone or if they accidentally get cursed, they just need to stay in group and just wait, and unfortunately they're going to die. They should not go take extra pads. They should just wait and die in group. And they can just go about what they're normally doing, try to DPS as best you can, and then once you die, get rezzed. I will note here that a strategy that a lot of people use, and it's valid, but it breaks my heart, is that they'll just have everybody die in group and just res everybody every time. I guess you can do that. It just seems like giving up, and not even trying to do the mechanic. And I don't think it's that hard once you've gotten used to it. We're going to come back to this curses in just a minute because I think that's the most confusing thing for people. So the last thing that happens, and it's actually partially the first thing, is that the main boss he'll swing around and do an overhead chop, and it causes these purple pillars to spring up. Now, the pillars spring up on the person who is furthest from the boss when that mechanic goes off. So what a lot of groups will do, and optimized groups will do this, is that you'll all stack up close behind the boss when you first come in, and then once he does the first tower, he causes that to spring up. It'll be really close to him. It'll be really close to the boss, and then everybody spreads out and gets in formation. I would not recommend, if you're in a new group, for you to try this, because usually curses go out very shortly after that, and if you have a new group, they won't be in formation yet. So when I go in here, I just have everybody go ahead and get in formation. The only thing different is that I make sure the off tank and the 2 healers kind of scoot up and are a lot closer than they otherwise would be, because you don't have to worry about curses or the DPS phase at first. The first thing that's going to happen is that he's going to spin around and cause a pillar to spawn along whoever is the furthest from him. So healers, you stand a lot closer to the group for a little bit. Off tank, make sure you're not too far, and then you're fine. The first pillar comes up and you're okay. After that, the healers move to their normal positions, and you do the rest of the fight like normal. Now, once the curses have gone out, and potentially you've had some cats gone out or a DPS phase, again, that depends on what your DPS is like, because the cats and the shield phase are both health gated, and the other stuff is more time gated. So eventually what he will do is this thing right here where he kind of crouches down and like flexes, and then his weapon glows all bright. That is what I would call the hide phase. So during this phase, what you need to do is run and hide behind those purple pillars that he caused to spawn. So you want to make sure that the pillar is in between you and the boss. And this can be a little bit tricky, so you probably want to hold block and just make sure you're firmly behind the pillar. And then what will happen is it'll explode, it'll destroy the pillar, but you won't die. If you're not behind a pillar, it will one-shot you. And that goes for tanks or anybody. So you got to make sure you get behind the pillar. Whenever someone calls hide, you need to stop what you're doing. You don't want to be rezzing unless you're really experienced and you know you can make it in time. But in general, you don't want to be rezzing. You don't want to be doing anything else. You just got to go hide. You got to stop what you're doing and go hide. Once it's blown up, then you can go back to getting rezzes and doing other things, but just go hide behind a pillar. And that is it for this fight. That is all the mechanics you're going to have to worry about. So again, let's go ahead and look at an actual fight here. We'll go through the whole thing. So first thing that's going to happen, you're going to run up. The tank, you need to really make sure that you do not move the boss. So just run up and melee taunt him. If he moves at any point during the fight, you want to put him back on this little patch of grass here on the ground, okay? In DPS, you always want to orient on that patch of grass and just trust the tank is going to move the boss back in position if he gets moved out. So you see that the pillar goes out, and then very shortly afterwards, the curses go out. Now again, what you're going to do if you're a DPS or a healer don't use the tank pads. Healers, you're not going to use it because it's not going to be the closest pad to you. But if you're like an M1 or an R1 or an M4 or R4, so on either side, you're going to, you might be tempted to go use that pad. Don't go use the tank's pad when the first curse phase happens, okay? Now, if you're a tank and you get cursed, you want to call that out. So off tank might call cursed, main tank might call cursed. If both tanks get cursed, then the off tank goes and cleanses and then comes back, taunts the boss in position so that the boss doesn't move, and then the main tank goes and cleanses and then comes back and taunts the boss back. You have plenty of time to do that. You don't need to rush. You don't need to freak out or anything. Just have the off tank go cleanse. Once he comes back, the main tank goes and cleanses and comes back, and then you're good. Now, there's only a couple of things that could happen here. So the best case scenario, neither one of the tanks are cursed during the first phase, right? So then 3 people go use one of the 4 pads that are around the outside that are not the 2 quote unquote tank pads. And then it'll happen again. There'll be a second curse phase, and then there'll only be one of the pads out there, and then there'll be the 2 tank pads, right? So in that situation, the second round, if one of the tanks is cursed and they call that, then you want to look and see if a tank is going towards the pad that you would want to use. And if they are, then you need to go to a different pad. And that's all there is to it. If none of the tanks call out that they're cursed during the second phase and their pads are up, you can go use them. You don't need to talk. You don't need to communicate. If the tanks did not call out that they are cursed, you can use their pads. And nothing needs to be said. And that way there's no confusion or anything else. Now, if the tanks do get cursed during the first phase, again, they might use one or both of the pads, and then they might get cursed again in the next phase. If that happens, they're just going to have to go to a different pad. And that's okay. It's no big deal. So, the case is either 1, the tanks use the pads and you don't have to worry about it, or 2, the tanks don't use the pads, and that'll only happen during the second phase, the second time that 3 people are getting cursed, in which case, if the tanks don't call that they're cursed, you can go use their pad. Now, what will happen is this will happen multiple times through the fight, and sometimes these pads have not respawned yet. So if your group is doing a good job of the stacks and extra people are not getting cursed, then there will always be enough pads. And sometimes, though, they will not have respawned yet, and so they won't be glowing. What you want to do is, again, this is in the situation where people are doing what they're supposed to, you want to go ahead and move towards that pad and just go stand on it. Because what will happen is that you will not be able to move, because you move slower and slower, and you'll get to the point where you cannot move, and then the pad will respawn. And so you need to be standing on it for when it respawns, and then it'll cleanse you and you can go back into groups. I've had countless people tell me, oh, I had no idea about that. I just thought if I didn't see a pad up, there's no pads up. And people get really mad and aggro because they think people are messing up. And it's just the fact that the pads haven't had a chance to respawn yet because they're on a timer. So again, as long as your group is doing the right things, and even if it's not, or you're not sure, move to the pad that you think you want to use. Hopefully it's one that didn't just get used. Also keep an eye out for that, and then stand on top of it and wait for it to respawn. And 9 times out of 10, that will happen. It will respawn on you, you'll get cleansed, and you can come back in a group, and then you can go on with the rest of the fight. Now, again, depending on how much DPS you have, shortly after probably the first curse phase, honestly, you're going to hit 80%. And that's when you're going to start getting more cats in. So again, the DPS, just need to chain them in, CC them as best they can. The off tank doesn't have a whole lot to do during this fight. So that's one of the things they can do when they're not having to go relieve the main tank, is they can pull in the ads and CC them. The other thing they can do is help out with reses when that happens. And then at 70%, here you have the DPS phase. During that phase, everybody needs to be DPSing. You don't need to be resing. You don't need to do anything else, because if you res somebody, they're not going to be able to take it yet anyways. So just do your best to DPS, and then make sure that when you hit 70%, someone's warhorning, someone's dropping a Colossus. And for raid leads, ideally, you don't want that to be one of the healers, because they're going to need to be healing, okay? So you can have them do it, but if so, they need to do it before that, like, at 72, 73% or something, and the buff will still last long enough to get through the DPS phase. Sometime shortly after that, it will be the hide phase here, and everybody will just run and hide behind a pillar. And you can DPS, I would note that you can DPS through the pillar, okay? So you can stand and stare at the boss through the pillar and go ahead and DPS them. Then after that, you're going to hit 60%, probably pretty shortly, and then you're going to get cats. I would note, if you're getting all these mechanics all at once and everything's just kind of like overlapping and running over each other, slow down DPS. A lot of times it's kind of weird here in Halls of Fabrication. you can have too much DPS and it can cause the fights to be harder than if you had low DPS. It's kind of frustrating, kind of weird, but just keep that in mind. And then the other thing you can do, again, if you're having people constantly die from cats or the healers are complaining, and it will be the healers most often, so listen to them, believe them when they tell you they're getting chunked down and it's a problem. When that happens, you just want to make sure that, okay, when the cats come up, we're all just going to turn and DPS down the cats and make sure that they're dead. And then just try to make sure that the phases don't overlap too much by slowing down DPS. And then that's it. Everything else is rinse and repeat. The hardest point of the fight is probably going to be around 30 or 40% when you get the shield phase, and then you have the cats. Other than that, it's just trying to make sure that your group is in a good location. Make sure the DPS are not moving too much. There's no DPS shuffle going on. Everybody's standing still, making sure they're not cursing their friends. And if you do that, you're going to be good. So the first ad pull you come to after that boss, you can just skip. So you just want to hang close to the rock and you can walk right past it. And while you're progging, that's what I recommend you do. Just save time. And then once you get around the rock, if you walk too far down the hill here, or once you do, you're going to go ahead and trigger the next engagement. And what's going to come running up the hill is there's going to be a shaman and a flesh render. So on the shaman ads, the main thing that they do is they hold up their hand. Maybe they have something in their hand. I can't really tell. But they hold up their hand in the air, and you'll see that there'll be little balls that shoot out. And what happens is those balls go to every other ogre within range, and it makes those ogres have an AoE explosion centered on them. So even these little ads, even though they die very quickly, you want to make sure that they're not in group and they're being held a little bit away from the group so that whenever this AoE explosion goes off, it doesn't kill anybody. Now, tanks will be fine. Damage mitigation is so high, it's not a big deal. But if you have a DPS who gets caught in two of these, it'll pretty much one-shot them. And if you have a DPS that gets caught in one of these and then maybe gets caught by some other AoE ability, like from the Sword and Board guy, it will still kill them. So just keep that in mind. And that's why, originally people said, hey, DPS down the shamans first because of this ability. And I'm just saying, what these ads are going to die. The smaller ads are going to die so quickly. I personally feel that the other ads are going to be more important and that the shaman should typically be last. So just keep that in mind. And if you keep having problems with the shaman doing that and it killing people because the DPS isn't stacked up quite properly, what you can do is just say, okay, yeah, kill the shaman and then have the tank pull the render out of group. And then the flesh render will do an ability where he kind of yells at the sky. And when he does that, it causes an AoE around him that knocks everybody back, stuns them, and then slows everybody. And he has to be interrupted. That ability is really the main problem that you're going to have to worry about. And there's a couple ways of dealing with this. One is you can pull them out of group and then just DPS everything else down and then go back to the render. What I would recommend you to do is just one of the tanks grab the render, and your job, ideally that would be a DK, and then you're just going to spam deep breath and intersperse that with bashing with your shield. So what happens with several of the ads here in Maw of Lorkhaj is that once they start trying to do a mechanic, if you interrupt it or dodge away or something, they'll just keep trying to do it. And that's what happens with this flesh render. So once he starts trying to do this ability and you've interrupted him once, you need to make sure every GCD that you're interrupting him over and over again. So again, I would just spam deep breath and then bash with your shield if you're getting low on mag. You can also have somebody in the group slot Crushing Shock, which is from the Destro skill line, and just have them parse on the flesh renders every time with that ability. I don't think you really need to do that. If you have one of the tanks with deep breath and then you have other people kind of helping out bashing as they can, you can keep this guy interrupted. I would note here too that with these ads, you want a trash setup so that you can kill these things very quickly, because there are multiple fights in there. I don't know, there's like 3 or 4 of them in Maw of Lorkhaj where it's just trash. It's just waves of trash. And so you really want to have a setup that you can put on after a boss fight that is designed for AoEs. Okay. Now on the next ad pull here, what we're going to have is a Sun Eater, a Sword and Board, a two-hander, and an archer. Okay, so what we're going to do is have the main tank grab the Sword and Board and the two-hander, hold them near but behind the Sun Eater so that they're not hitting the group, and then you're going to have the OT is going to taunt the archer, and it's going to stack them on top of the Sun Eater. And then that's it. I would note too that with this Sunder that the two-hander does, if he goes to do it, it's an overhead chop. And if you see that going to happen, you can dodge roll through him. You don't want to dodge roll back or to the left and right, because oftentimes it'll just cause it to reset and then they'll try and do it again and you have to dodge again. So the only way to get him to stop doing that is to dodge roll through him. I just don't really recommend that for new tanks because it's hard. It's tricky to get the timing. And again, you could just, at this point in the game, it's easy enough. You can just hold block and you'll be fine. All right, so coming up, this is the first set of wave of ads. It's kind of a boss. This is a boss fight, but it's just a bunch of ads. And there are 5 waves. It's kind of confusing. So there are a lot of different ways you can divide it up. I'm going to tell you what I recommend, okay? So the first wave, you're going to, on the right here, you're going to have a flesh render and then a couple of smaller ads. So I would have the main tank grab that, and everybody runs up and DPSs the flesh render. And then the off tank is going to grab the shaman and his 2 ads and stack them on top. Now, by the time the shaman gets over there, this flesh render is probably going to be like half dead. That's totally fine. Things are working good. Just go ahead and kill the render and then kill the shaman, and you shouldn't have too many problems. Now, immediately after the last ad is dead here, it's going to spawn the next wave. So just realize that. And also note that if too many people die, you can hold DPS on these different waves, res people with like 1 ad up still that still has a little bit of life, get everybody resed, then go ahead and kill them, and then move on to the next ad phase. Now, the next ad phase here, we're going to get a Sun Eater, a Sword and Board, a 2-hander, and an Archer, okay? So just like that last ad pull, okay? So you're going to have the exact same thing. Main tank is going to grab both the melee targets, the 2-hander and the Sword and Board. Hold him a little bit up towards the entrance from the Sun Eater. Everybody's going to run up and attack the Sun Eater. The off tank is going to taunt the Archer and then wants to range stack the Archer on top of the Sun Eater. So the first 2 ad phases here are not too bad. The next one gets a little bit more tricky. The next one, we're going to have 2 flesh renders and 1 shaman. Have the main tank grab the shaman and the flesh render. So the flesh renders are really the problem. This is why you want that AoE interrupt. If you have a DKing group, a mag DK or something, or even a stam DK, they could probably help you with this and work on that AoE taunt, or I'm sorry, AoE interrupt. In this situation, I would go ahead and DPS down the shaman first, because otherwise, since you have 2 flesh renders, they're going to be alive for a while. So I would go ahead and have the group go ahead and DPS down the shaman first, have the off tank bring the other render into group. Main tank is just holding this one. Make sure you're spamming those interrupts, shield bashes, and everything else, because they're both going to do that ability at the same time, and it can definitely cause people to die. Now, this phase also is not too bad. The 4th and 5th, as you might imagine, get consecutively worse. All right, now with the 4th phase, you're going to have a render, a shaman, a Sun Eater, a 2-hander, and an Archer all spawn. So you got 5 major ads that you need to worry about. What I would recommend doing is having the off tank grab the 2-hander and the Archer, and what you're going to do is you're going to stack the Archer on top of the Sun Eater, and then I would just hold that 2-hander outside of the group off by yourself, okay? So you're just kind of hanging off by yourself. Then you're going to have the main tank, or it really doesn't matter which tank is doing which, by the way, in general here. So then you're going to have the main tank, in this situation, grab the shaman and the flesh render and stack them on top of the Sun Eater. Once those 3 guys are dead, then you can go worry about the 2-hander and the Archer and kill them. The Archer is going to end up being stacked. So then you can go worry about the 2-hander. Again, the off tank should be fine, just kind of holding that off by itself. But you just have a lot going on this particular one. So again, just to restate, have the main tank grab the Sun Eater, the shaman, and the render, stack it on top of the Sun Eater, and then DPS all that down. The off tank is going to range stack the Archer on top of all that, and then just hold the 2-hander out of the group for this one. And what I would recommend for you, if you're new to this and you're really worried about this, is just to write all this down and keep it on a sticky note about what your particular job is in any given one. You want to probably have a list of everything that's in a particular round, but then also just like a list of what you're supposed to be grabbing, and that'll make things a little bit easier for you. Now, another thing that the DPS and the healers can do, if at any point, there are loose ads, which will absolutely happen when tanks are new. I mean, they've got 2 or 3 things they got to taunt. They're not sure where they're spawning yet. They're going to get in group. If they get in group, what you need to do is run towards the tanks. And you really want to ideally get out of the group, because they're not going to be able to see what to taunt if it's in the middle of the stack, because there's so much stuff going on. So move to the kind of circle around to the left or right out of the group and then head towards the tank. And what that'll do is that'll make it easy for the tank to turn and be able to taunt that thing, and then run past the tank. Hopefully he'll grab the taunt on it. You might need to say something. But if you move it out there, move it out of the group, don't just stand in the group, because they can't see what's going on very well. Move out of the group and then kind of circle around back towards the tank. They will grab it off of you. That's how you can help them out. Now, on the last ad phase here, this one's a little tricky, but kind of fun. So what you're going to have is 2 Sun Eaters spawn, 2 Sword and Board guys, and 1 Archer. So you're going to have the off tank grab the Archer and the Sun Eater that is closest towards the entrance, and then you're going to range stack those on the second Sun Eater that's more towards, I guess, the corner here towards the exit, and that's what you're going to do. That's a very important job. Hopefully by this point you've kind of gotten used to the range stacking and you get them stacked pretty well. And then you're going to have the main tank grab both of the sword and board guys, and you're going to grab those sword and board guys, and you're going to stack them just on the opposite side of the DPS from the Sun Eaters, and then everybody's going to DPS them down. So if you've kind of seen through this, these ad pools start off fairly easy and then they get much harder. So I would make sure that you save ultimates for the 4th and 5th ad phases, both for DPS and for support. So making sure that you're dropping a Colo, a Warhorn, and that any kind of Deshtar ults you've got, drop them when you can on all of these ads, but especially save them for the 3rd and 4th phases. And if you do that, these ad pools, they won't be too hard. You should be okay with them. All right, now on to the second boss. So this boss, there's actually 2 of them, and they're referred to as the twins, Skinrai and Vashai, I believe. And one is purple, one is yellow. Usually they're just referred to as a light and dark or purple and yellow. Sometimes people say white and black, but they're neither of those, so I don't know why people say that. But anyways, dark and light is the most common thing probably, which I kind of like since I'm colorblind. But anyways, what's going to happen is that you need to split the group in half. So you need 1 tank, 1 healer, and 4 DPS on the exit side, and then 1 tank, 1 healer, 4 DPS on the entrance side. And then what you want to do is you want to be right in the center of the kind of the circular room here in between the entrance and exit doors. And you can run over to that side. You can run all the way to the exit door without taunting any of the bosses. You just want to be careful, but you can run over. It's not a big deal. And then what's going to happen is that you want to get in 2 stacks, and the DPS need to be stacked up super tight, and the healer just needs to be just slightly behind them, far enough back that they can combat prayer everybody. And then the distance, to judge the distance of this, you want to be about 18 meters apart. And the reason I know it's 18 meters is because that's how long your wall of elements is. So if you drop a wall of elements on one side, it should just be reaching the people on the other side. Okay. Sometimes people try to get super close because they think that, oh, I'm so cool. I've been in a speed mode hard run and we get half an inch from each other. And only noobs blow each other up by not doing right. You don't need to do any of that. Okay. You can be a little bit apart. You do want to be fairly close together because it makes things easier. You get a little bit of cleave on both bosses, especially on the pull. But again, the edge of your wall of elements is far enough. Then what the tanks are going to do is that they're each going to be standing in kind of a little bit in front of their stack, and the exit side is going to taunt the yellow boss, and the entrance side is going to taunt the purple boss. And you want to place that boss right in front of your DPS stack where it's facing the other group. So you as the tank will be a little bit outside of the group, but ideally there should be a pretty straight line from your healer on one side through your DPS, through one boss, through the other boss, through the other DPS, and to the other healer. You want that to be a pretty straight line. And the reason for that is because there's a bunch of AoEs and stuff, and you want your DPS to be able to hit both bosses because it'll just kind of give you a leg up on the DPS race here. Now, after they've been taunted for a second, what's going to happen is that there's going to be what's called the prayer phase, and it's a little bit different this first time around, but it's going to keep happening every time. There's going to be cycles. There's 3 phases to this fight. So this is the first phase. And then while they're doing that, what's going to happen is the 6 people closest to each boss are going to get the same head color. So your head is going to turn the same color as the boss that you're closest to. So the 6 people closest to that boss. So this is why it's very important that the groups are stacked very tightly, that the healer isn't too far from the group, and that the tank also stays pretty close. Okay. So there should be 2 groups, one with one boss, one with the other boss, and then there should be a little gap in between. And if you mess this up, what usually happens is with the healer on one of the sides gets a different color, and then they immediately blow up everybody in that group. Because if you get too close to someone with the opposite head color, you blow up. And that's actually something I recommend you do. If you're brand new to this, you want to go ahead and do this phase, taunt the bosses, get the head colors, and then let people kind of run out and then run into each other so they can see what happens and how close you can get. And if you need to, do it a couple of times so that everybody who's new has a good idea of like, oh, I can't get very close at all to someone of a different color, and I should probably just stay way far away from it. Let people blow each other up a couple of times. It's kind of fun anyways. You feel like a human blast bones, and you can kind of, get an idea of how close you can be, which is not very close at all. Now, once the bosses pray, those 6 people, on each side get that color, then what you're going to do while they're praying, so don't wait till afterwards. While they're praying, each tank is going to turn and taunt the other person's boss, and you're not going to see any effect. They're still going to keep praying. They're still doing a mechanic. So you're not going to see any effect unless you have an add-on that shows that you have the other boss taunted. Okay. And then as soon as they're done praying and you get your color, you want to very quickly, and you see here, I kind of cheat oftentimes because I know how to time it right, but then you want to move your boss into position. And I'm going to cover positions here in a second. But first thing we're going to worry about is, okay, we got our head color. All right. Then we move and we're DPSing the boss. The next thing that's going to happen is what's called conversions. Okay. And conversions, what happens is 3 people on each side start to get the head color of the opposite side. So remember I said you'll blow people up if you get too close to them and you're the opposite color. So what happens is that you have to switch sides. So 3 people on each side have to move to the other side. Now, the easiest way to do this is everybody moves in more or less a clockwise manner. So you stay to the left. As you head to the other side, you stick as far as you can to your left. Move to the other side. Now, how you can tell if you're getting a conversion, there are add-ons that will tell you and it'll pop up and stuff like that. I don't usually play with those. It's pretty easy to see as well. So if you look at your feet will start glowing the color of the opposite side. So it's very easy if you're purple and you're getting converted to yellow because it's so bright. The purple is a little bit harder to see. So the boss does kind of this fist pump thing, and that's what indicates, okay, conversions are happening. So then at that point, the tank or raid lead or whoever's designated to do callouts will say conversions, check your feet. Everybody, if you need to spread out, stop DPS, that's fine. The main thing is that you need to make sure you have to do these mechanics. DPS is so secondary. You got to do these mechanics. You look down, you check your feet, and you see, okay, am I converting or am I not converting? Okay. If you are converting, then you start to move to the other side and you run to the opposite side, and then you cross and then you move to the other side and you're good. So you don't want to cross in the middle because you don't want to run into the other team trying to switch sides. You want to make sure you go kind of towards the outside. Now, if you're running over to the purple side from the yellow side, you'll see that he drops these negate bubbles, and you don't want to run through those. Those negate bubbles hurt very badly. So make sure that you can go to the right of them. Even though you're trying to stay as far to the left as you can, don't run through those negate bubbles. They should be against the wall. Go to the right of them, move into the group, and then you've got your new color and you're good to go. Don't worry about has my head color changed yet? If you were converting, just head to the other side. I have tried to run over to the other side quick enough that I killed people on the other side because I hadn't switched my head color yet. And I think it disables that mechanic because I've never been able to get over there quick enough to kill anybody on the other side. Okay. I'm testing stuff out for you guys. I tried to kill people and it didn't work. Okay. So you just want to move over to the other side. And then now that's your side now. Okay. That's all that happens. That's your side. You are now that color. You don't need to worry about anything else. Now, the next mechanic that will happen is that the bosses will teleport up in the air, so they'll just disappear. And then they randomly appear on near the entrance or exit door. And which door they appear at is totally random. So it could be that, the purple boss goes to exit and the yellow boss goes to entrance. It could be vice versa. One of those two things, but it's random what it does every time. When that happens, as soon as they teleport away, you'll be DPSing the boss and you'll be like, where did the boss go? Okay. The raid lead or whoever's doing the call outs should say, get ready to switch. When the raid lead calls get ready to switch, and I'll kind of show you some graphics here, you want to move to the other side of your semicircle, but stay inside of your semicircle. So you're getting ready if you need to switch sides. So everybody moves clockwise. Again, you don't need to follow the outline of the outside of the building. You just need to move to that side of your semicircle where I've indicated here. And then you can either wait for the raid lead or whoever's doing the call outs, or you can look yourself. And what you're looking for is to see, is the boss by the door on my side the opposite color of me, or is he the same color? Okay, so remember, you always want to DPS the boss of the opposite color because you have a serious damage reduction against the boss of the same color. So you've been DPSing the boss of the opposite color of you. You look towards the door on the side that you're on and you say, okay, is this the same color as me or is this a different color? If it is the same color as you, then you don't want to be DPSing that boss. So you're going to go ahead and switch sides and go to the other side. If the boss is the opposite color of you, then you're going to stay on that side. So what this should sound like is the boss teleports away and then you hear, get ready to switch. Everybody stops what they're doing, stops rezzing, don't do anything else, don't worry about dead bodies, start to get ready to switch sides, and then the raid lead will call either switch sides or stay. If he calls switch sides, you move over to the other side, go get fairly close to that boss and start DPSing him. Or if he calls stay, you run back to your door on your side, whether that's entrance or exit, and start DPSing that boss again. Now, this is the third third phase, right? This get ready to switch, and then you either switch or stay. It's random, so you have to figure that out. And having someone call that out is the easiest way. And then what's going to happen is the first phase is going to happen again, and this begins the cycle anew. What's going to happen is that boss, so you're all going to lose your colors, so the bosses will explode, and if you're on the wrong side, you'll get one-shotted, okay? So that's why you either need to switch or stay. And then, again, you're not going to get caught by that because you know what's going on, so you're going to move over to the boss that you're supposed to be DPSing, and then what's going to happen is that the prayer phase is going to happen again, and they're going to bow their heads, and they're going to pray, and the 6 people closest to that boss are going to get that color, okay? And so this is all that you have to do. Those 6 people, closest to that boss, get that color. Same thing happens. Now, remember what happened last time when everybody got the color, right? You don't want to be DPSing the boss of the same color. So the tanks are going to go towards the center. You're not going to cross the center line or even get, super close because you don't want to run into the other tank. You're going to range taunt the boss on the other side, and then you're going to move him into position, and everybody is going to wait for that boss to come over, and then you're going to DPS the new boss you have. And that's literally it. Next thing that's going to happen is conversions. Then it's going to be get ready to switch. You'll either switch or stay. And then it's going to be, okay, we're getting our colors again. And those are the 3 phases. It's just going to repeat the whole time. Now, obviously it's more complicated than that it's a little bit more tricky than that. Not necessarily more complicated, but it is more tricky than that because if someone dies, you can get converted while you're dead. Which is a huge hassle. You can also, I said the 6 people closest to the boss get that head color. That includes dead bodies. So if you have an imbalance where you have 7 people on one side and 5 people on another, the people with 7, the six of those people are going to get one color, and that 7th person is going to get the other color. And if they're too close to anybody else, they're going to blow up instantly. Okay. So, this gets really confusing for people, understandably so. It was super confusing for me. I've died here many, many times. I still make mistakes every once in a while. And I've also had where people are like, oh, my add-on is telling me I got a color, so I switch sides. And that's during the getting colors phase, and they think it's the conversion phase. Those are 2 different things. When you don't have a color and you get a color, that's one thing. Conversion's the second thing, and then switching is the third. 3 phases. All right, now I've simplified that a bit. Let's go ahead and talk about all the details and what this actually looks like in a fight. So we've stacked up here and we're waiting on our tanks to taunt. They're going to go ahead and taunt each boss. Once everybody gets their color and you've already taunted the other person's boss, you need to move him into position. And what will happen shortly after that, and this happens every phase, ads spawn. And it starts off with 1 ad, and then it's 2 ads, and then it's 3 ads, and then it's 4 ads. So when it gets up to 3 and 4 ads, even at 2, it's a little bit tricky, okay? And so you want to make sure that you taunt and pull in the bosses of the same color as the boss that you're currently tanking. So the one of the opposite head color. And that way that tank can just turn to his right, taunt in the purple ad, or chain it in, and then you're good to go. So what we're going to do here, again, with the purple boss, what you want to do if you have him is you really need to put him into the corner of your semicircle here. And you want to make sure it's this particular corner because everybody's moving clockwise, right? So you want to be close to far away from where your group switch and close to where the other team switches. The yellow boss can just be held right in the center. I think he's being held in a little bit different spot here, but he should just be held right in the center. And that just makes it easy because there's going to be yellow ads that spawn. Now, the reason you're putting the purple boss in the corner is because what he's going to do after a little bit, he's going to do a negate bubble. And what it does is it targets someone in a cone in front of the boss, and then it's whoever is furthest away from him in that cone. So you want to make sure that you never turn the purple boss towards the group, because then you can have a negate drop in the middle of the group or in the middle of the room. And if that happens, it's okay, but it usually does mean it's a wipe if the group is new. So just keep that in mind. If you get a bad negate, don't be afraid. The first couple of times, go ahead and let everybody see what's going on with the mechanics and stuff, but eventually you'll probably want to reset and start over again. Now, like I said, the ads are going to spawn very quickly, so you want to go ahead and both the tanks chain in their ads. If the ad is too far away, one thing you can do is range taunt it, and it will typically move closer to you because it's out of its range. Your range taunt is longer than its attack range, and then once it moves closer, then you can go ahead and chain it in. This is mainly for non-DKs because DKs chains go a lot further than some of the other classes, several more meters. So if you're using Silver Leash, you might have to taunt an ad and then chain it in. You can see in this one here, I actually chained it in, and then I'm going to chain it again a second time. So that's also an option for the tanks. But the main thing is to get those ads very quickly, get them in the group so that they can die because they do cause problems. Now, you're DPSing the boss. A couple of things that can happen here is that the yellow ads and the yellow boss both do what I think most people refer to colloquially as the Jesus beam. They send out a beam of light towards one person at random. It could be someone even on the other side. When that happens, that person gets stunned and cannot do anything. And the only way they can be broken free is if somebody else interrupts that ad or that boss. So it's very important if you ever see the yellow ads channeling that you make sure you interrupt. You just got to go up and just give them a bump, interrupt them. It's first priority, okay? It's very important that those ads are interrupted. Now, you've got the ads, you've pulled them in, or maybe you're trying to work on it. What's going to happen is that next thing is going to happen is conversions, okay? And they kind of pull their arm in by their side, their weapon in by their side, and do this like fist pump thing. That means conversions are happening. Okay, so when those happen, what you need to do, raid lead calls conversions, check your feet, and everybody turns and looks down at their feet. Okay, if you're converting, then you want to go ahead and switch sides. So they're happening now. And then you want to go ahead and those three people switch. The other group switches as well. Make sure you don't run through the negate bubble. Make sure you're keeping the wall on your left. And then the next thing that's going to happen is that the bosses are going to teleport away. And as soon as that happens, you're going to say, get ready to switch. And you see that I take off running towards the opposite corner. And then I'm looking back to see where which boss is going to spawn on my side. And one of these that I have, I don't even stop running. Normally, I get over to the other side, I stop for a second, look back, and then I either call switch or stay. And the reason, again, you're just trying to move away from the other group to the opposite side of this semicircle here, and then you can either cross or stay. Then you move over to that other side, get close to the boss so that you make sure that you get the correct head color. With the new group, DPS it. Tanks, you go to the center, and then especially if you have everybody up, you can just go to the center during the prayer phase and taunt the other person's boss, okay? You taunt them, nothing will happen, but just trust that, okay, I've got my taunt off, there's nothing else on the other side to taunt, and then pull the boss over. And then here you can see that I've got the yellow boss now, and so I get Jesus beamed and then have to be interrupted. I will note on this second phase, if you have the yellow boss, almost always what happens is that you get stunned. He starts to do that beam immediately as the ads are being spawned in. So this makes it very difficult on you. So if that happens, you just need to realize if you have the yellow boss in the second phase, your tank is almost definitely going to get stunned at the exact moment that he needs to be chaining in ads. So you need to make sure that you interrupt extremely quickly, okay? So you just need to people need to be Johnny on the spot. It's not very hard. Just make sure you're interrupting and then move on to the other side. And again, it's just rinse and repeat like this. There will be conversions. You need to check your feet. They will teleport. You'll need to either stay or switch, and you just rinse and repeat. Now, there are a few other things. I know there are probably some people out there like, he hasn't mentioned a bunch of stuff. Let me go ahead and go through the rest of that now. So one of the things, healers, you need to have a purge tracker. Okay, there are several add-ons that work. I think one is literally called Purge Tracker. Sometimes these things go out of date, and a different one will be in fashion. Probably just ask in a local Discord, and someone can tell you, or even in game. But you need a Purge Tracker, and then you need a cleanse to cleanse those purgeable abilities. So I believe I have been told from some folks in the Healer's Haven, which is a great resource for healers, that whenever the yellow ads go to do that beam is when the cleansable dot gets applied to people. Okay, that's what I've been told. But if you have a purge tracker, just keep an eye on it. Make sure you've got purge on your bar and go ahead and cleanse, and then just keep heals up. Okay, it's not that hard. A lot of people will say, you can just heal through this dot, and good healers can. I have struggled before. Maybe it was another mechanic. I don't heal very often, but in general, just keep a purge on, purge the group, and then just keep your heals up. Okay. Now there is a question here of, wait, what happens if the tanks get the conversions, or what happens if the healers get the conversions? So the good news is tanks will never be converted as long as they're keeping up their taunt. So which they should. So the tanks should never have a problem with having to convert. However, the healers could have to convert. So whenever the conversions go out, if you're a healer and you're converting, you just want to call healer converting. And if both healers call out healer converting, then you both switch and then you just heal your new side and everything's fine. Now, if only one of the healers calls out healer converting, they need to move to the other side, but then what you're going to do is kind of stand in the middle of your semicircle, and you're going to have to heal your original side because they don't have anybody over there. So just keep that in mind, that you are going to have to drop heals on the other side. And then you'll just keep doing that, where you're having to, it's a little bit tricky for healers because you have to just keep healing the other side. But after a little bit, you get kind of used to it and it's not too bad. Just make sure you don't get too close and don't run into anybody. And then if you stay towards the center, everybody switching sides should be very much to the outside of you. And so you shouldn't have a problem with that. I will note that there is one other thing you can do. So if you do have to switch and you're a healer, and then so you're healing the other side, right? You've been converted. Okay. So you're in the second phase. The next thing that's going to happen is to get ready to switch phase. And you're going to stay with your group on your side, get ready to switch, and then you switch or stay. Now you've moved to your new side, or you've stayed where you're at now. What's going to happen is the explosion's going to happen. And then shortly after that, or right when that happens, you also lose your head color. Okay. And then they're going to begin the prayer phase shortly after the explosions. Now, I don't typically have my new groups do this, but it is something you can do. And so I just want to make you aware of it. What you can do is that healer who's having to heal the other side, when nobody has colors, and you'll have to kind of get used to this. I'll show it to you here. When that moment is, you can pick a DPS on the other side and say so-and-so, so you could have your nameplates on, and say so-and-so switch sides. And all your DPS need to know that if a healer tells you need to switch sides during that phase, you don't ask questions, you don't think twice, you just switch sides, okay? And you both have to switch sides and get on the other side to rebalance out the group, so there's 6 and 6, and then you can now start off healing your other side. So honestly, I don't usually do this, I just leave it up to RNG. Sometimes you get lucky and both the healers get converted at the same time, or neither healer gets converted, and so they don't have to do anything complicated, but you can do that. That is an option. Now, let's go ahead and talk about, actually, I'll mention here real quickly, if you're like a Nightblade DPS and your groups get ready to switch, that whole phase happens, definitely make sure you're throwing down your path, because at first people react kind of slowly, they have lag or whatever else, they're new. So it can help them get across and not get one-shotted because they didn't quite make it across the line in time, because you do really have to run. The other option there is you could also have your supports potentially slot rapid maneuvers. I would not have a DPS do that, because you want your DPS doing DPS. A lot of times it's kind of a trap for DPS. They want to help out, and someone asks if a healer or tank can do something, and they're like, oh, I can do that. And it's like, no, you should be DPSing, not doing these other things. You're not a support, you're a DPS. That's your job. There are rare occasions where you might do something different, but in general, that's what you should do. Now, I will also note that if the ads, when you start getting 2 and 3 ads, it's really hard to get all of the ads that you want on the correct side, because they spawn in different places, and then some of them are melee, so they're immediately going to take off and go attack somebody. So they just need to be taunted very quickly. So honestly, once you've gotten the switching and staying figured out, and everybody knows when to move, when not to move, the next biggest problem you're going to have is going to be with these ads. They absolutely need to be pulled to the correct side. If they're on the right side, they will die super quickly. If they're on the wrong side, they're going to be up forever. And so you just need to make sure that the tanks are taunting them. And you can have a DPS help. So if you've got someone who can slot chains, getting them pulled over, that can be very helpful. The yellow ads just need to be taunted and they'll run over to you. But the ads need to be taken care of for that. So again, tanks, this is your job one. Tanks, you can eat a heavy attack unblocked, and it will not kill you. So you really don't have a whole lot to do besides positioning. The next thing is to get the ads chained in, get them taunted in, and so they can die and cleave. And again, it's totally okay to have a DPS help with this, to help chain them in, or even have a healer do it, DK or anybody with Silver Leash. Wardens also have a teleport ability. Those are all things you can do. Now for tanks. So again, for the purple boss, you're going to taunt him and you're going to put him in the corner. And then every time at the corner of the semicircle where I've indicated here, and then every time he drops in a gate, the first time you're going to dodge roll to your left and then just walk the rest of the way out. Go ahead and pull the boss out of the negate bubble, and then you can kind of put your back kind of towards it or get kind of close to it. The reason you want to pull them all the way out of the negate bubble is because when people drop their ground dots, if it is too close or too much through that negate bubble, it'll be negated. It'll go away. It'll get eaten. And so the DPS on that boss will be greatly decreased. So you want to pull them outside of the negate bubble a decent ways, a couple of meters at least. And then you want to get close to the negate bubble because he's going to drop another one in a minute. Usually they drop 3 That's on average. Sometimes it glitches and they won't drop any. Sometimes they'll drop one. A lot of times, I think this is totally just glitches, but sometimes it'll drop 2 in a row, like really rapidly. But usually it drops 1, there's a gap, 2, there's a gap, 3, there's a gap, and then usually that's it. So again, you move back towards that negate bubble and you kind of go around the outside. And the reason for that is you want them to maximally overlap so that there's more room for everybody to move around it. So again, you've been around the outside. He drops the first negate bubble. You dodge roll to your left. He drops the second one. Then you have 2 options. You can keep going to your left. The only thing that I would recommend is you don't do that. Now, you can keep going to your left for the third negate bubble, but what you don't want to do is you don't want the negate bubble dropped in front of the door. And the reason for that is because when the bosses teleport, one of them is going to be inside that negate bubble, and the DPS is going to be a lot less on that boss. So typically what I do is I dodge roll forward towards the group, pull the boss out of the negate bubble, turn him around, and then I'm kind of right in that corner that the 2 circles have made, and I let him drop his third negate bubble there. Again, the reason I do that is because I don't want it too close to the door, and it also puts me in a good spot where I can chain in any extra adds or anything like that if I need to. But you could just drop all 3 along the wall. That's also fine. Rarely, if ever, will you get 4, and I think that's usually when things are like glitching out or not going right. So anyways, that's it for that phase. Again, as soon as you see the boss teleport away, you're tanking him, so you should see it and you can just take off running. If you're the yellow boss, you got a pretty easy job. You're just standing there in the center, buffing and debuffing, keeping interrupts, trying to help out with that, and then you're just holding it, and then you get ready to switch, and again, you do the same thing. You run over to the other side, it blows up. You didn't die because you're on the correct side. Colors get given out. The tanks run towards the center, taunt the other person's boss. And then again, if you were just yellow and you're getting the purple boss now, go ahead and run to your corner. After you've taunted him, that way he runs directly towards you, and that just makes things easier to get him in position and make sure you don't accidentally get a negate bubble dropped in the middle of the group or some weird place. So you really want to be quick with that. Chain in the adds and just keep going, rinse and repeat. Now, if you are a Dragon Knight tank, you definitely want to be slotting deep breath, and this might be one of the few situations where you actually have like a DPS maybe slot that if you have enough DPS. The reason is the third and fourth phases, you're going to get a lot of adds. And what will happen is you really need to have the bosses close to dead by about the 4th phase. And you want them to die pretty close together, because when one of them dies, you have a timer until the other one does his explosion mechanic, and that kills everybody if he's not dead by that point. But in general, since you're switching sides, they should basically die at the same moment. If you're having problems with one group being really lopsided, you could switch some DPS. The other option is that you could make sure that the side that is slower is getting ultimates dropped on their boss more often, and the Warhorn is being used more often on that side, and that will help to balance out the DPS as well. Now, once one of the bosses dies, okay, the colors no longer matter. So as soon as one of the bosses dies, what everybody's going to do, all the DPS are going to rush to the other boss that were on the one that died, and then just start DPSing them. Also, at the same time the other boss dies, a bunch of adds are going to spawn in of both colors. What's going to happen is the tank and healer on that one group, or if you have, again, a DK that has an AoE, deep breath, AoE interrupt, are going to run around and interrupt and taunt all the adds they can. Okay, you need to watch out for the Jesus beams that CC people. Make sure you're interrupting those yellow adds, and then just make sure you're taunting everything you can once your boss is gone. Ideally, again, they die so close together that it's just kind of a sprint to that last couple of percentage of health, and you can kill the other boss, and then you're good. And that's the fight. That's the twins. Now, the problem you're going to have is that people are going to die. People are not going to convert. Then they're going to blow somebody up. Somebody's not going to interrupt the yellow ad, and they're going to get CC'd and eventually die from the damage they're taking. Other things can happen. People aren't going to switch sides quick enough, and the explosion's going to happen, and they're going to die while they're on the edge. If that stuff happens and you lose more than 1 or 2 people, it's probably going to be a wipe. Okay, if you're new, it's just too complicated to try to save it, and I wouldn't worry about it too much until you've gotten a clear, doing it fairly cleanly. The easiest way to get a clear is for no one to die, or only 1 or 2 people to die and get reses. So if anybody dies, you need to res them very quickly so that you can continue doing the mechanics. Don't try to res somebody during the switch phase. So when you have to get ready to switch and then switch or stay, if you have to switch or you're getting ready to switch, do not try to res anybody. If you're staying and there's dead people on your side, that's the perfect time to get reses. You want to make sure to go ahead and get reses. If you're a raid lead, and you have people dying and dead people converting and stuff like that, you can look around and try to count and see, okay, do I have 6 on one side, 6 on the other? And you can tell people to switch, a healer if one of them converted, or a DPS, or if you're a DPS, you could switch sides. All of that is much more complicated though and a lot harder to do. So again, ideally, you just res people as quickly as you can, have them switch sides if they need to, or stay if they need to, and just try to balance out the colors as best you can. Because of this fact, if you are more experienced, typically what you would do is you tell everybody, once you've either switched or stayed, that's why you have everybody get close to the boss, because you might have a dead body or two kind of floating around, and you might have your raid lead or someone who's experienced kind of look around and go, okay, do I need to switch sides or should I stay? And they can kind of help balance the colors. But again, that's much more advanced if you're new, and most of the people in your group are new, or everybody's new. Really what you want to do is just try to prevent those deaths from happening in the first place, or get reses so quickly that it's not a problem. Now, I will note that if you are dead, you still keep a color, and you can also get converted. If that happens and someone reses you, you need to wait for them to move away from you before you take the res, okay? And then check your head color, see if it's the same as the people on your side, and just go to the group with the same head color as you. A lot of times people will get up and they'll panic and they won't know what to do, and they'll think they need to switch, and they're running around like crazy. If you're not sure what to do and you're not sure about your head color, don't move, or move away from the group. Sometimes there's room and you can move to a corner, but don't just run around like a crazy person. Don't run backwards because you don't know what's behind you if you can't see. You just want to stand still and figure out what head color you are, and then figure out if people on your side are the same head color or not. And if they aren't, switch sides. But again, don't stress too much about this kind of stuff, because if you're new, the best and easiest way to do this is just to keep people from dying in the first place. The last thing I'll note here, there are some add-ons that will help with this. I will pop them up here. And these add-ons will tell you when to switch. Some of them will put little icons above people's heads so you see what color they are. And then if you convert, you can also, when you're dead, everything's grayed out. It's hard to see what color you are. This will put a little icon over your head. So anyways, these add-ons can help, but honestly, you don't necessarily need them. Some people rely so heavily on add-ons that their add-on tells them to do something and they just do it, and they don't understand what exactly. Usually the add-ons aren't wrong, but usually it's because they're misunderstanding what the add-on is telling them to do. And so they think the add-on is telling them to switch, and it's actually just telling them, hey, you're getting a color and you didn't have one before. It's kind of superfluous information, but people think they need to act upon it. And so when they get their color for the first time, they think instead that they're converting, and they'll run to the other side and kill the other group. So, add-ons are kind of a double-edged sword. They can be helpful, but they can also be a hindrance, honestly. And if you get used to one way or the other, it's probably best to stick with that way, and that's totally fine, either using add-ons or not using them, but they are definitely not required. All right, well, that's it for the twins. Let's go ahead and move on to the next. All right, so once you finish with that boss, the next immediate thing you go into here is another kind of quote-unquote boss fight where it's just waves of ads. So the first thing that you come to is there's these two large cougars. And the easiest thing to do here is to have everybody stack in the corner over here real tightly and have the two tanks walk and go aggro these cats. Now, these cats can't be taunted, and you'll see that the same purple light kind of appears above you, or cone or whatever it is, or pillar of light, and that indicates who they're targeting. Now, what you want to do here is just kite them. You cannot taunt them, and if they hit you, they will one-shot you. Whether you're a tank, whether you're blocking, it's a one-shot. So as soon as the tanks run over there and get aggro, or they get the pillar of light, everybody runs out and just starts DPSing them, and then the tanks can just kind of run in a circle, and everybody just DPSs the cats down. Now, periodically, they will switch targets, so it will switch for the tank, and it'll go on one of the DPS. If it appears on you, you just need to run away from them. You will not be able to react fast enough to dodge their light attacks, which will one-shot you. So you just want to kind of run away, run around in circles. One thing you can do if you're having problems with that is you can run up the ramp here and then jump off when the cat follows you, and then it won't jump off. It'll have to walk down the ramp, and that can kind of buy you some time. But then everybody just DPSs these things down. It's kind of honestly, it's kind of a fun part to this trial. Then the next thing you do, starting on the right side probably, is that you'll have to walk up that ramp, and then you'll see that there's a chain that you can pull. So have one of the tanks typically do that. When you pull that chain, what it's going to do is just below that platform there, it's going to start summoning in ads. and it'll summon in several waves of ads. As soon as everybody's dead, the next group will spawn. Actually, I think it's on a timer. I think they'll just keep coming, but you should have them dead in no time. And then as soon as all of them are dead, it will go ahead and spawn in a new group. I think if you take long enough, though, it will keep spawning the groups. If I'm correct, I would have the same thing you had before happen, where you have the off tank taunt the ranged, the archer, and the Sun Eater, and then you have the other tank get the sword and board and the two-handers. And then what I like to do is have the tanks stand with their back towards the chain, and so that's where you'll hold the sword and board and the two-hander a little bit behind that, and then the Sun Eater, of course, won't move. Everybody stands facing more or less towards that chain area, and again, you want to make sure you have your trash setups on for this fight, because it is waves, it is short burst damage, and then DPS everything down, and that's it. You just rinse and repeat. The only thing is, when you go over to this other side, you have to do the same thing over here, and one of the last phases, you will actually get 2 Sun Eaters, so you just need to pay attention to that and make sure that you DPS them down first. Over here on the last kind of area, what I would do is I would kind of hold ultimates. You can have a Warhorn, a Colossus on each wave, but when you go over to the far side, when the second the ad pool with 2 Sun Eaters and a bunch of different ads and stuff spawn in, just make sure that you've got ultimates ready for that one. And I believe that is the 4th phase when they spawn in. You get kind of like one phase where they spawn in, and then a short time later you get a second phase. But again, just do the same thing. Have the supports grab the same ads they've been grabbing. As a tank, you kind of stand in the corner, hold block, make sure you're dropping Colossuses and everything else. And then you get your treasure here, and then you move into the next room. Now, once you move too far into the next room, you can open the door and go in, but if you move too far into the room, it will go ahead and start the encounter, and you have more ad phases here. I know, so many ad phases. So hopefully by this point, you guys know what to do. Have the main tank taunt the melee ads and stack them behind the Sun Eater. Everybody DPSs down the Sun Eater while cleaving down those ads. The off tank can grab the archers and can help CC the cats, and then rinse and repeat. You will get a couple of Sun Eaters on some of these pools. Just go ahead and have everybody target the same one, just call it out, and then kill the other one, and it's not a big deal. Now, after that, we are actually on to the last boss, Rakkhat. All right, you've done it. You've arrived at the last boss. Now, compared to the twins, this fight is a lot easier, but it is not trivial by any means. And some people will regard this as being kind of trivial and will say, no, if you get through the twins, last boss is easy. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. There are some tricks here. There are some things that you really got to be careful for. So to begin with here, you'll want to have all the DPS kind of stack up on this little patch of grass or just in front of it, and then you'll run up and start DPSing the boss. Now, the boss will stay in the center there for a little bit, so the tank, you just want to run up and melee taunt the boss and hold him there, and then after a couple of seconds, he's going to teleport to the very center of this middle pad, and then, again, all the DPS stays DPSing them. Now, when he does that, he's going to curse the center pad. And so you want to make sure that the DPS, nobody is on that center pad, because you don't want to get cursed, okay? So just make sure you're not on the center pad, but you can just DPS them from this patch of dead grass here. Now, once he teleports to the very center of that pad, the main tank wants to go ahead and move into position on the first pad. And you'll stand right here. And the reason for this, the reason for standing right here is you need to be on the pad, the golden pad, to get the buff, because otherwise the boss will kill you. It gives you a damage mitigation buff. So you need to make sure that you're standing on that pad. And the reason you're standing in this position, what he's going to do is he's going to stun you, and you're going to drop to one knee. You need to break free immediately, because he's going to teleport strike you after that. And if you're still stunned and you're not blocking, he's going to one-shot you. So treat it like a heavy attack. So then he teleport strike, he stuns you, you break free, and you're blocking, so you're okay. But then what you're going to do is move around a quarter turn to your right, and then the DPS is kind of turn to their right and start DPSing the boss once he's teleport striked. And they can even move a little bit so that they're directly behind him opposite you. That's where they'll be at on the other pad. So a lot of times DPS just kind of get used to that and they go ahead and move into that position. Now, this is a great window when he goes to this first pad. This is where you want to save your ults and drop them here. So your Colossus and a Warhorn, because you have the whole group here and you can get a really good burn on them. And then what's going to happen shortly afterwards is the second pad is going to light up. Now, as a main tank, as soon as that second pad lights up, you're just going to go ahead and move to that pad. You can dodge roll through the boss. That's what I usually do. Or you can just kind of run around him and move to that pad. And then you're going to get on the opposite side just like you see here, turn back towards the boss. Make sure you're keeping taunt up. And then what's going to happen is he's going to do the same thing where he teleport strikes you, he stuns you, and then teleport strikes you. So you're going to have to break free again. So every time you move to a new pad, you need to make sure you have enough stamina. And it happens throughout the fight, even while you're on a pad. He'll stun you. You need to break free quickly because he's going to heavy attack you, and you'll get one-shotted. And then once he does that, you're going to move 180 degrees to turn the boss around. DPS, when you see the main tank go on the first pad, you're going to stay there and keep DPSing the boss because he stays there for several more seconds. So you want to keep your burn on him, keep DPSing him, and then once he teleports, not until then, that's when you turn around and start DPSing him on the next pad. And you'll actually move around to the back side. And this is what will happen every time, okay? He'll teleport to a new pad. The DPS will run around that pad to get to the back side. The tank will have already been on that back side, will get teleport strike, and the tank will move about 180 degrees to turn the boss's back to the DPS. Now, when the second pad lights up, off tank, you're going to be buffing the group and debuffing the boss, kind of hanging out back there. But you want to keep an eye on that second pad because as soon as it lights up, you need to be in position. And what you want to do is be in position and facing towards the center because an ad is going to spawn there. And you need to taunt it. It's kind of like the two-handers where it debuffs you, it puts a shatter on you. It's just like a more powerful one. So what happens is the shatter, you can take 2 stacks of the shatter. The third shatter will one-shot you. So you need to make sure if you're running add-ons or you're counting, you need to make sure you never have more than 3. But if you don't have add-ons, I'm going to explain how you don't need them. You'll be just fine without them. So anyways, you'll taunt him, and you want to be standing here because you want him in front of the DPS so that he gets cleaved down and dies quickly. Now, shortly after you've got him on here, the third pad is going to light up. Now, a couple mechanics come into play and a couple of things change on the third pad. So first off, whenever the third pad comes up, that's when the backyard runners go ahead and take off. And again, I'll cover that at the end after I explain the rest of the fight, but that's when the backyard runners go ahead and take off. Now, the other thing that the boss here will do is he'll jump up in the air and he'll come down and he'll like kind of flap his wings and it knocks everybody back. Whenever that happens, all the DPS, healers, tanks, you need to make sure that you're blocking so you don't get knocked back. Main tank, you don't want to get knocked off your pad because repositioning the boss can be horrible. And also you want to make sure that you keep that buff so you don't die from that. And everybody want to make sure that you don't get knocked into one of the other pads because the purple pads will curse you. And what the curse does, it's different than the curse on the first boss. Instead of slowing you down and then killing you, what it does is it makes you do damage to your allies that are nearby you. So if you get cursed and then you go stand in group, you're going to be damaging everybody, and it can lead to people dying. So if you do get cursed, you need to run to one of these cleanse pads, just like on the first boss, and walk through it. There's 4 located throughout this boss area in each one of the corners. Now, I would note that the runners need to use those pads when they come back in because just by going into the backyard and coming back in, they're going to be cursed. So, a bunch of people shouldn't be getting cursed. You need to make sure you block. Again, when he jumps up in the air, just hold block. And there are 2 mechanics that he does that he jumps up in the air. But, if you just do it on all of them, it's safer that way until you get the hang of it and you know which one is which. Now, again, when the third pad lights up, couple extra mechanics that happen. So the first thing that happens is as soon as that third pad lights up, the main tank obviously needs to start moving towards it, doing just like they did with the second pad. And they also need to go ahead and taunt the ad. So at that point, your off tank should have 2 stacks of the armor sunder on him. And so you want to go ahead and taunt the ad to make sure he doesn't get a third and doesn't get one-shotted. And honestly, besides that, he doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. Now, when you move to this third pad, he should almost be dead. If he's not almost dead and not going to die very quickly, this is a point where you might go ahead and have your group, your DPS, go ahead and focus him down. I would also note that if he has a ton of health at this point, one of 2 things is happening. Either the off tank is not positioning him properly, which should be fairly obvious, or the DPS isn't positioning themselves so that they can cleave him down. And you might just need to remind them or say something. Also, stamina groups have a little bit less cleave, so you could have a problem there, but they have higher single target damage. But anyways, once he gets on the third pad, he needs to be dying pretty quickly. You don't wanting him put a lot of sunders or shatters on your main tank. Another thing that happens, and this can actually happen just before the third pad lights up, but it can happen anytime after the third pad lights up, and this is just a new mechanic you have to deal with throughout the rest of the fight. Anyways, I think he can say a couple of things, but the main thing is he'll hold both of his hands up in the air, and that's when the kite phase happens. So typically what you'll do is you'll have both healers. One kite's on the inside of the outer circle, and the other one kite's on the outside of the outer circle. And by circle, I mean the circle of these pads that we're kind of moving to, okay? So just so that there's room, one kite's on the inside in between that that outer circle and the center pad, and the other one just is outside of that outer circle of pads. And all you got to do, it's kind of like Veterum Asylum Sanctorum. You just need to walk backwards. If you kind of start it late or notice it late, you might need a dodge roll. If you're dodge rolling when it comes down, you're not going to take any damage. You're going to be just fine. But you just move back for a little bit, and then once you've got a little bit of room, you can move to the left or right, and then start walking back forward. And before you know it, the mechanic will be over. You can also have a ranged DPS do this, and they honestly shouldn't need a self-heal, really, unless they're just struggling, maybe at first until they get used to it. But in general, even a DPS could do this if you would like, if your healers are struggling or whatever, just, personal preference there. The second mechanic, I believe it's second, mechanic that happens here as well is that people will start getting unstable void is what it's called. And if you have raid add-ons, I believe it pops up. But basically, you'll get an AoE start to grow at your feet. And these are the old visuals. So the newer mechanics, when this starts to happen, there'll be a line, a very thin line, a circle around you, and then it'll fill up. And once it reaches the outer line, it blows up, or the mechanic happens. This one, you won't see that thin line around the outer side. They just didn't bother updating it whenever they added mechanics and made it look more clear visually. So it's really hard to see, and it's also purple. So you'll see this purple thing, it'll start to grow at your feet. When that happens, it doesn't get very big. So you need to quickly get out of group. And ideally what you would do is go put your nose in one of these corners in the wall. And the reason that you do that is because what happens when it goes off, you explode and it stuns you, and then it sends out these purple orbs, 6 of them around you equally. And so if your nose is in the wall, what will happen is that several of them will clip into the wall and only a couple will go out. So instead of shooting out 3 or 4, you obviously shoot out some in all directions, but instead of sending 3 or 4 towards the group, you'll only be sending 2 at the absolute most. So that's why, you'll have, go stand in the wall, go put your nose in the corner. That's why, so that it doesn't go in a group. What happens is that if people get hit by 2 of those balls, it will one-shot them. Okay, they won't take any damage. They just insta-death. Okay, so it's not like, you can block through it or anything like that. No, it's insta-death. So if you have these unstable voids going off in the middle of the group, it's probably going to hit everybody or almost everybody. And besides it doing a bit of damage, the second one is just going to one-shot everybody. So the first one will still do damage to everybody. The second one will just one-shot everybody in the group. So you need to make sure that you take out those unstable voids. I would say the unstable void is probably the biggest cause of group damage and wipes here in this part of the trial, is having those go off in groups. So just like with conversions on the second boss, you want to make sure that you're paying attention. If you've got add-ons, it'll pop up and say unstable void, and make sure you're moving out of the group. Now, if you're kiting, if you're one of the kiters, either a DPS or a healer, you might still get this mechanic on you as well. And that's kind of a bummer. If that happens, again, just try to move away from the group as far as possible so that they don't get hit by, they get hit by as few of those balls as is possible. And generally, it's not a problem. But if you can't get into the corner, just away from the group is also fine. So again, just to go over this real quickly, what mechanics we've had so far, we've got a kite, we got the unstable void that happens on one person at random that needs to get out of the group, and then we have the boss jumping up in the air, coming down and wing slapping everybody and knocking them back. Those are the 3 main mechanics you've had to worry about at this point. Now, on the third pad, the runners are in the backyard, and the third pad lasts for a long time. So this is a really good burn phase for everybody. Really get your parse set up and just parse on the boss. Try to get him down as quickly as possible. Make sure the ad doesn't stay up for more than 10 or 15 seconds on this second pad, on this third pad rather, so that the main tank doesn't get too many stacks on him. I will note, if you have add-ons, once the main tank has his sunders, his shadow armors drop off, because they drop off after a certain amount of time, your add-on will tell you how many stacks you have and when they drop off. And in theory, you could taunt the ad back and just, again, keep everybody on the boss and cleave down that ad until it dies. Because, again, the third pad is going to last for a very long time. Now, while the runner's in the backyard, you can have your off tank or even possibly one of your healers kind of keep an eye on the center pad here. And these 6 shadows represent the ads in the backyard that your runners are having to kill. So what you can do periodically, the runners might ask you, how many more we got? Well, what's going on? And you can say, we got 2 left, 2 right, 2 center, or you can say 1 left, 1 right, 2 center, whatever's left, however many of them you can see that are up. And that can help the runners. Typically, when you're first starting out running, you want to go ahead and run the same path every time regardless. But after a while, you can kind of know which paths are considered center, which ones are left, which ones are right, or just kind of like, I definitely know that one's a right one, or I definitely know that's a left one. I can skip that because I've already gotten 2 on my side. Alternatively, the runners can also talk to each other in comms and say, one right, two right, one right, or one center, two center, and that kind of stuff. And that way the other runner knows what's going on as well. And that's a different way of doing it. Both are fine. Now, what will happen is that these shadowy figures in the center will start to sink through the floor eventually. And when they're totally gone, that's going to be a party wipe mechanic. And it's just a timer for the backyard people. So they have to be completed with their task before a certain amount of time has passed. After a while, this will be a struggle at first, but after a while, it won't be an issue at all. But just know that that's what that mechanic is. Sometimes also it glitches out and they'll have failed in the backyard, but it won't kill everybody in the main room here. And you can res everybody and keep going. It just glitches out sometimes. But anyways, when the fourth pad lights up, you're going to have another ad coming out. So you want to make sure you have your off tank in place and go ahead and taunt that ad. Just like you did on the second pad, you're going to do the exact same thing here. And this happens every pad. So on the second pad, on the fourth pad, and on the sixth pad, you're going to have an ad coming up and you need to taunt it. Make sure you stack it right in front of the DPS or where the DPS is going to be at. And then again, as soon as that pad lights up, the main tank is going to go ahead and move towards it, get in position, make sure the boss is in the center of the pad, turn him around. And then everything else is pretty much the same here on the fourth pad. You're going to keep having the same mechanics happen where he's going to wing slap and not jump up in the air and wing slap everybody, knock him back. You're going to have kites happening, and then you're going to have the unstable void happening as well. Now on the fifth pad, you're going to have a new mechanic happen on the fifth pad, and you'll see these purple balls that just kind of float around. They'll pick one or two people to tether to, and if it picks you, it's going to do damage to you when it's close to you. So you want to make sure that you move away. So you're going to move out of group and move away from that ball, and it'll kind of follow you, and eventually it'll go away. You can move out of group and then kind of circle around too and move back into group for heals. And usually it's not that big of a deal. Just don't stand in group with it, especially in new groups. In some groups, people can't just stand in group and you can't heal through it. But in general, I wouldn't recommend that. You don't really want to do that. You just want to go ahead and get it out of group, avoid all the damage you can, The other thing that's going to happen is that you'll get balls shot at you from the center there on this fifth pad, and it kind of does damage to everybody. So everybody needs to move very quickly to the fifth pad, get stacked back up, and get in heals. And again, radiating regeneration can be a lifesaver here because you have DPS who have to move out of group or who are kiting, and just generally taking a fair amount of AoE damage. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping everybody up. Healers just realize, again, they're going to be getting shot at and taking AoE damage or just kind of environmental damage regardless of what's going on. But as long as you've got heals down, as long as everybody moves quickly to the fifth pad, and as long as the people that have the little balls on them that are tethering to them, the tethers, as long as they're moving out of group, you're not going to have a problem. Now, on the sixth pad, remember off tank, you're going to have an ad coming up. Make sure you taunt it, get it in position so that it can be cleaved down, and you're DPSing the boss. Now, I will point out on the fifth pad, if you're at 35% on the fifth pad, generally speaking, that means you have enough DPS, and this will change over time, okay? So, you'll have to get a feel for it with your group, but generally that means that you don't need to run the backyard again. Now, if you're above 35% on the fifth pad, you need to go, as soon as it comes up, you need to go ahead and send the runners to the backyard again. And they may have, when you're first starting out, they may have just gotten back, okay? So they might have to run in, they will have to go cleanse, and then turn around and run back out. And so just keep that in mind that might be something you have to do on the fifth pad. Again, when the sixth pad comes up here and you've got the ad, and actually this applies to the sixth pad, and it also applies to the fifth pad, the seventh pad. If you've got the ad up and you're almost in execute starts at 10%. And what happens to the boss teleports to the center, and you also get another ad up. Now, remember the ads, they do the sunder thing, and you can only take 2 stacks of them. So you can't really have multiple ads up at the same time. So you want to make sure before you go into execute that you've single targeted down the ad if you need to, if it's still up, so that the off tank can grab the new ad and doesn't have to worry about having multiple shatters on him. Alternatively, or if that ad just died and you get another ad up and execute, go ahead and have the main tank grab it instead of the off tank. And then if another one spawns, then you can have the off tank grab it. Okay. And so in that situation, the boss is hanging out in the middle, and this is a DPS phase. You need to get through it quickly. Otherwise, you're gonna have a party wipe. You can, since you're having the main tank taunt the ad at that stage, you can instead have the have the off tank debuff the boss in the center. And then again, it's just a DPS race here, and it should go fairly quickly now. If you get to execute, usually you're going to clear. Usually it's, if you have everybody up, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Now, I will say on the 7th pad here, you will have one more mechanic, and you'll see these big, like much bigger purple orbs come up. And all they do is they explode and kill anything that's nearby. So if you see one of these big purple orbs come, dodge roll out of the way, move away from them, and you shouldn't have a problem. Now, once the boss teleports to the center pad, everybody, it's just a DPS race at that point. You can hold the ads outside a group. So main tank, just pull them out outside a group. Don't worry about them, and keep them interrupted, and then just DPS them down. Oh, I might have forgot here that the off tank needs to make sure that they keep the ad interrupted at all times. You don't want his ability going off. It just causes a lot of problems, and it's very easy to avoid. So if you see him bend over holding his stomach or whatever, and you see the sparklies coming off of him, make sure you bump him and interrupt him. Once you're on the center pad, what you're going to see here is that there'll be purple orbs that will spawn, and you'll see a tether go from the purple orb on pad 1 to the boss. What that's doing is providing him with a bunch of resistances. And all you need to do is have one of your tanks or one of your healers, and you can have set up like who's going to do what, probably whoever has the most experience. But probably best to start with the off tank if the main tank is going to have an ad. And all you got to do is dodge roll through that pad, and you will get cursed, obviously, but it will break the tether going to the boss in the center. And then over time, a tether will spawn on pad 2 and then pad 3, and it'll keep going around the room, and it'll give him more resistances. So then you can have your, you can have your main tank, you can have a healer go, and all they need to do is like move through, typically dodge roll through that pad, and that'll take off the tether. Not more than 2 or 3 should come up before you should be cleared, and the boss should be dead. And then that's it. That's Veteran Maw of Lorkhaj. Now let's go ahead and go over what the backyard runners should do. Now, backyard runners. So first thing you're going to do is you come to the backyard here, and you're going to see this pop up. It's going to be a synergy button, X by default, and it'll say Eyes of Jode. You want to hit that, and what it does is you kind of wave your hand, and it gives you a speed boost, and it also allows you to see the ads that you're trying to DPS down. So for the left runner, I have a way of doing this, and I know that there are a lot of ways of doing this. This is actually a famously hard problem to do. Like, we still don't have a solution, like an elegant and simple solution for how to go to a bunch of different points where you can go to any which one of them, but how to do it most efficiently. It's a famously hard, it's an open problem in computer science and in math. So keep that in mind. There is no necessarily... you can brute force it and figure out which one is maybe particularly optimal for a given set of points. But in general, this is a very hard problem to solve analytically. So if there is a way that you normally do it, or if there's a way that you have some sort of graphic that does it, that's totally fine. I'm going to show you how I usually do it, show you my path. And again, if you have a better way or a different way of doing it, that's totally fine. Just do it that way. But you come in, you hit synergy as soon as you walk through the doorway. That gives you the speed boost. So you don't need any kind of speed boost on your bar for running this back area. And it also allows you to see the ads. Now, there's 2 kinds of ads that will spawn. One will be these larger cats that are much larger than your character. Even if you're a very tall character, it'll still be larger than you. That's the easiest way I figured out to know what it is. Also, I think they're preying. So, you can see that. All you got to do is 1 point of damage to them. That's all they have, one point of health, and they'll go away. And that's all you need to do. You need to kill 6 of those between you and your partner in the backyard. So what you can do is drop a wall or some other area of effect, and then you need to go up and make sure you hit the Eyes of Jode, and then see if one pops up. If you got your waller down or whatever, it should kill it automatically. If not, you can light attack it. Now, often what I will do, because I'm trying to go fairly quickly, is I'll go up, I'll hit that Eyes of Jode, and then I'll go ahead and move to the next one and hit the next one. While I'm hitting the next one, I kind of look back to see, okay, did anything spawn? And maybe if I've dropped a wall, I don't need to worry about it. But if I haven't, or my wall is somewhere else, you can just light attack it. Okay, and one hit and it'll go away. The other ad that spawns are these assassins, and then you can see they're very small, they're dual wielding, and those guys cause problems. So you just need to kill them when they come up, hit them a couple of times with your spammable, and you shouldn't have too big of a problem. You need to make sure you throw on a heal for running backyard. So you need some sort of self-heal. Vigor works just fine. If you have a class one, that's also fine. You don't want to shield, you just want to heal. So keep that in mind, because I believe it's oblivion damage, and oblivion damage is not affected by shields. It'll just kill you and leave your shield intact. It ignores it completely. So the other thing you need to worry about is these purple balls that are floating around. You don't want to get too close to them, or they will damage you. So you can get to close to a few, and you will as you're running around. But just realize when you're getting close to them, you need to pop vigor or whatever your self heal is, and then move past them as quickly as you can so that you don't die. If you've got an assassin on you, you probably want to go ahead and DPS him down before you do too much else, because you don't want him stunning you when you have to jump across these ledges. And yeah, that's it. You just kind of run, get your path down, whatever you like. Again, I'll show you what I'm doing. Hit each one of them in the Eyes of Jode. Now, I will warn you, you can go too fast, or at least I've had this experience where I hit it and I run to the next one and I'm going too fast and I don't actually reveal it. You need to make sure that you kind of pause for like half a second where you're at, hit the Eye of Jode, confirm that anything popped up or didn't pop up, and then move to the next one. The other thing is you need to make sure that you are getting the guys as they pop up. A lot of times new people will go up there, they hit the Eyes of Jode, and then they keep running, and they don't think, they get confused which ads are which. So make sure it's the really big ads, only have one hit point. Make sure that's what you're hitting. And then if you finish early with your side, you can go help the person on the other side. But regardless, once you're done, and you just head back into the main room. Now, once you head back into the main room, both of you need to cleanse. There's 4 cleanse pads around the outside here, and you need to go cleanse, because if you move in a group while you're cursed, and that's what you are when you go to the backyard, if you move in a group, it'll DPS, it'll hurt everybody around you. Okay. And then the other thing is you can't run again. If you try to go through the portal a second time while you're cursed, or go through it a first time. So if you accidentally get cursed before you need to run by getting knocked back into one of the other pads, it'll kill you instantly. You'll just die. So keep that in mind. You'll need to go cleanse if that happens, and then go to the backyard. Another note, if you die while you are cursed, and this kind of goes for everybody, but what will happen is that these panthers will spawn on your dead body until you're resurrected. So it can't be very hard for them to res you, and they want to make sure that, if you send a DPS over there, they're going to be fine unless a cat has just spawned or is about to spawn on your body, and then you want to make sure that a tank taunts it, or that, it doesn't aggro on you before you run over there. So you can wait if you're a DPS and you need to res somebody over there, wait for the cat to spawn, come in a group, and then you can move over there and go res that person. But if you take too long, more cats will spawn. So just keep that in mind. And that's really it. So the times that you run are on the 3rd pad, and then again on the 5th pad, and by the 7th pad, this run will be over, right? If it's not, that's a whole nother deal, and probably the best thing to do is just go work on some parses and come back in here and get it by the 2nd pad. But you might have to run backyard twice, and just keep that in mind. But anyways, guys, that is it for my veteran Maw of Lorkhaj guide. I know this is very long. I try to go in depth, make sure I can give you all the information and stuff that you need to get through this and get through it easily, even with a new and inexperienced group. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. If you have any advice, also feel free to drop it down below. And hey, if you found this guide helpful and you bothered to watch this whole thing, which is over an hour, I would really appreciate it. Again, if you found it helpful, share it with other people. Obviously like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. You can see what other videos I'm coming out with, but I will be coming out in guides with all the trials eventually. I'm just kind of working my way through them. They take a lot of time to go through this in depth, but I would really appreciate it if you know somebody or a Discord or something that could use these, definitely share them around. I'd really appreciate that. But anyways, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.